Hey guys, Buildzoid here, and I hope you don't mind this format of videos where is the color? Is it my hands? Oh, it is. Put my hands in the picture and the color, the white balance goes out the window. I am not that pale. The camera is lying. Well, whatever. Screw it. I don't know how to fix that actually, so we're just gonna have to deal with that. Anyway, I hope you don't mind this format of videos where I just basically put things on the desk and talk a little bit about them. Today we're going to go through a whole bunch of things because, I've made a whole bunch of, not necessarily the most sensible eBay purchasing decisions. And, well, gotta get some, you gotta get it covered with YT revenue, haven't, with YouTube revenue, don't we? So anyway, the first thing that I've picked up that I'm really excited about is this heatsink right here. So this, you might think it's just a downdraft CPU cooler, but this is actually Thermalright's custom GPU heatsink. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is because I love this kind of heatsink. Well, I love custom air coolers for GPUs. I've already done a video talking about the Morpheus heatsinks, like these from Tech, and how much I love these because they're like you basically get the cooling performance of an AIO without having the dangly radiator bit, which for me is really annoying because with these, you can put the card in the system, you can pull the card out, you can do all kinds of modifications and everything, and you don't have to deal with, like, where does the radiator go? Is the radiator going to hit something? Am I going to stab the radiator with a screwdriver by accident, ruining the slowly destroying all the fins on it? The first few times it's not a problem, but like you need to still have some fins left at the end of the day, right? So if you keep stabbing it, eventually it'll stop working. But anyway, yeah, so I'm super excited about one of these because the thing is, I got it on eBay for 25 quid and it came with a GTX 480. Like, honestly, the listing was like, oh yeah, here's a GTX 480 and it has an air cooler. But for me, air cooler with a GTX 480 attached. The GTX 480 is just a bonus to me. Because this thing, like, Thermalright doesn't make these anymore, which I think is a real shame. And the reason why I'm so excited about this thing is because this, unlike a lot, say the Morpheuses, this leaves a lot more of the card exposed. So, for example, on GTX 480s, I'm quite sure that this would clear an e-power. So if you have this mounted, you could still have the e-power. So that's super convenient because, I think last time I did an e-power build, what I did was I basically just had an LN2 pot on there while I was testing the card to start up. Because the LN2 pot takes so long to heat up that, I could turn it on. I could probably even run Firestrike before the system would overheat. But with one of these, that's no longer, like, I don't no longer have to deal with that. And this thing's crazy, like, compared to the Tech coolers. And it's a real shame that, like, I really wish Thermalright went and did an even larger version, like extended these heat pipes right here. So this is 8 6mm heat pipes in total, which is, I think, the largest number of heat pipes I've ever seen in one of these like GPU air coolers. They should have just extended it and done a second fin stack like over here. At that point, it would, lose the whole, oh, it's so nice and compact and I can clear an e-power here factor, but I think it would be like if they could get more cooling performance out of it, I'd be total, like, they could have done like two versions, like an extended version and this version as well. So yeah, still, I'm super excited to have one of these. I've not used it yet, but I will be using it probably pretty soon. My main issue with it is the mounting hardware is a little overly elaborate, in my opinion, compared to like the Morpheus heatsinks or even like what LN2 pots have, because like I actually, even the Morpheus heatsink, I've replaced the mounting hardware. So that's one of my main complaints for all of these GPU air coolers is just like on the Morpheus, I basically have, this is actually, this right here is the GTX 480 that, let's zoom out a bit. This right here is the GTX 480 that came with this heatsink. It's really bent. So yeah, that's one thing. It's really bent. It's not like, it might initially look like a reference card. Obviously, I've already gone to town on it. This doesn't actually do anything. It's a GTX 480. I think I've already tested that once before, where it's like I added a whole bunch of capacitors and came to the conclusion that GTX 480s just don't care. this one's very much more of the same. But anyway, this might look like a reference card other than like the Asus branding right here, but this is not actually like that reference compared to say some of the other cards out there, because I guess we'll take it apart because this doesn't have overly convoluted mounting hardware, mostly because I replaced all the mounting hardware, where it's basically just like, I really recommend this to anybody who has a Morpheus and just uses it a lot for like quick testing. Just put some long M2.5 screws through the mounting bracket, because it makes life so much easier. Bam. Right. Oh yeah, and I've already delidded the card. So it didn't come delidded, but I have delidded it. Had to make clearance on the VRAM heatsinks here. Unfortunately, those are thermal epoxied on, so there's no way I'm getting an LN2 pot on this thing, because I've had experience with this thermal epoxy once before, and the experience basically goes, thermal epoxy is stronger than your BGA, than your solder balls, and more importantly, the PCB itself. So yeah, I've already had I've had a different card with thermal epoxied on heatsinks where trying to remove the heatsinks basically remove the memory chip, which wouldn't have been the biggest issue if it also didn't remove a bunch of the traces for said memory chip from the PCB. Which that's just like, I'm not fixing that. There's just no way I'm fixing that. So yeah, this thing's basically going to be stuck on like air cooling or water cooling. Like a water block could technically clear through this side. I just don't have the right angle fittings for that kind of setup right now. So for now, it's just kind of stuck on air cooling, which is rather annoying in my opinion. But the thing is, this is not a completely reference card because Asus decided to replace all the MOSFETs. Other than that, it's basically it is a reference GTX 480, but it does use slightly different MOSFETs. I've not actually checked if they're better or worse. I think they are probably better, but I'm like, don't quote me on that. I've not checked. But these, again, not sure. But they should be pretty decent. Like, these are MOSFETs that Asus used on like a whole bunch of high-end hardware, so now, it is possible that on a lot of the high-end custom cards that they did, they just had so many of them, like so many phases of them that, they could be pretty mediocre and it doesn't matter. But, because, yeah, if your per phase current capability is pretty low, you can fix it by just having a lot of phases. Yeah, still. So that's the GTX 480 that came with it. And it's not even that good. Like, the maximum it benchmarks for Firestrike is like 930 core. And I've had voltage control issues with it. So this card's just been kind of annoying. But the nice thing is, like, it's not a loss to me because it came with it came with a heatsink that I really wanted. And it did give me an excuse to bench GTX 480 SLI, because I actually have another GTX 480. This one's getting e-powered. Mostly because this one doesn't have a whole bunch of heat sinks attached to it, because I want to run, like, the e-power is mainly for LN2 with a GTX 480 on ambient. Like, this doesn't even scale with voltage, but I think that might be also maybe a software bug of some kind. I'm not entirely sure yet. But, yeah, with the GTX 480s, it's like I mostly want to run the e-power for sub-ambient, and this card has a better core, doesn't have the stupid VRAM heat sinks, because this came as a blower card. As a gift. It was like, yeah, this was a gift from a fan of the channel again, because I think I was gifted a different GTX 480, and I spent like 2 hours or something trying to e-power it on a live stream. That failed. And then off stream it died again, and like, everything was fine. Like, it just died randomly. It wasn't my fault. Like, it just up and died. And when I looked into it more, that card apparently was baked back to life once before. So, yeah, that was a loss. But this one, as far as I know, has never been baked. So this one should be perfectly, like, good to go. So I'll e-power this one. And this one's just kind of like, well, I could run SLI with it. Ultimately, I mostly wanted the heatsink. But I did get a chance to run GTX 480 SLI for hardware bot points, because 3D Mark Vantage gives way too much weight to the CPU score, so got a good number of points with this card thanks to that. Unfortunately, in SLI, and with how long Vantage is, the air cooler actually is a bit of an issue, because yeah, I ran these in SLI, which quite the setup. Anyway, I'll pull up the score, and we'll move on to some of the other acquisitions which are more interesting. So yeah. there's the score. You know, if I could have gotten, like, I was also having issues with Precision's profiles not, like, triggering properly or something. I'm not entirely sure what's wrong with it. Because I could have probably done GT1 at, like, at least 20 megahertz more core clock than what I was doing. So I could have had a slightly higher GPU score for the first 3D Mark test. But, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, the score is high enough as is, and eventually, like, assuming I don't blow up the other one with the E-Power, I'll just rebench with one E-Powered and one on water cooling. Well, I'll put both on water cooling eventually, and we can run again. Like, there's no issue doing that. But yeah, the bend to this card, though, is just ridiculous. And this isn't going to get E-Power just because there's no way I'm getting those VRAM heatsinks off. Like, yeah. Well, I guess eventually I'll look into getting them off. Like, sometime when I don't... When I inevitably have way too many GTX 480s, because I'll find an excuse to pick up 4 of them eventually for sure. That's just, that's inevitable at this point. I have a problem with buying graphics cards for no good reason. Yeah, if I end up with 4 of them, then this one I'll experiment with getting those heat sinks off again, because I need to find a solution to that, because it really is, for me, a major problem. Though I guess it might the heat sinks might be why this card clocks memory a bit better than the other one, but they are both Samsung. Anyway, moving on. So, yeah, I got to bench some SLI 480s. Didn't really get the highest score ever, but don't really care. Did get a really awesome new air cooler to mess around with. I need to, well, it's just, for now, it's basically just a collection piece. I haven't used it at all, which is a shame, but I do intend to use it. So, anyway, moving on. Other collection pieces. Here we have an HD 7970. It's red. The PCB is literally red. That's the only reason why I picked it up, is I wanted a red PCB. Because the thing is, I have a black PCB 7970, I have a blue PCB 7970, and now I have a red one. So, yeah, I have the whole 7970 color PCB color collection at this point. This could turn out to be a pretty decent card. I don't know. I don't think it's I hope it's not a boost card, but actually it might be a boost card. I can't tell. I'm not entirely... Well, whatever. It doesn't really matter that much. We have a 6-phase VRM, which could have been a 7-phase if Power Keller hadn't been a bunch of cheapsteaks, but they left out the 7th phase up top. Then again, this really isn't like... You can tell this isn't like their top-of-the-line model for a 7970, so... Can't really expect too much from them. This is also the PCB for, like, I've actually done a PCB breakdown of a similar PCB design to this. The design I did a breakdown of doesn't have the option for the 7th phase up top, I don't think. But this is a PCB that most of the time when you see it it's mostly used on 7950s, so they're really cutting costs. But when you see it on the 7950s, what they do is they actually have some of the power plane exposed, so that you get better thermal dissipation, because obviously the solder mask acts as a bit of a thermal insulator. So, yeah, but I picked this up because it's a red PCB, and, you know, like, if it clocks well, like, the good thing is I actually have I can make BIOSes for this PCB that just completely take off all the power limits. If I remember, like, this card should also have working voltage control, which is pretty neat. Working voltage control for both the core and the memory. This card came with SK Hynix GDDR5, so yeah, we'll see how it clocks, which actually I don't think I have a single 7970 in Elpida, so that's not like a new addition, but I really just wanted this card because it's red. Like, that's literally the main reason I wanted to pick one of these up. It's red. I think it'll look cool if, you know, to run it on LN2. And I do intend to run this on LN2 because it can't possibly be worse than my other 7970s. Like, my other 7970s, so there's like the 7970 Vapor X I resurrected. That thing sucks. Just absolutely awful. And that has nothing to do with me resurrecting it. That's just, that card is awful. Then there's the 7970 Vapor X, which is not as bad as the other, the 6 gig Vapor X card. That one's not as bad as the first 7970, but it is still pretty bad, and it has some voltage issues with, like, it would black screen if you set the voltage too high on, like, permanently black screen if you set the voltage too high on liquid nitrogen. So I want to, like, redo that card completely. And I'm not sure that it'll clock that high because if I remember correctly, it clocks like at minus 110 degrees Celsius. That card clocks worse than my reference 7950 on dry ice. So that card, again, also just doesn't have the best core clock either. I think the problem with the Vapor X cards is that when Sapphire rolled out the 7970 Vapor X cards, they also had the 7970 Toxic Edition, like the Vapor X Toxic, and that card is a 1200 megahertz stock clock 7970. So I think every single Vapor X card that isn't toxic that they made at the time has to be like a binning reject, because there's no way they were getting that many 1200 megahertz core GPUs. So yeah, that kind of sucks that all my other 7970s are terrible. So if this thing, like, hopefully this has a chance at being better than my other 7970s. Unfortunately, the VRM on this is actually the worst implementation of this PCB style that I've seen so far. Because it's so the 7950 that I have, which uses the MSI Power Edition 7950 I have that uses a similar PCB to this, is like 10 watts more efficient at 260 amps output than this is. So that's great. That's really good job, Power Color. I mean, I don't know what I'm thinking that, what I want to experiment with on this card, I guess, is just maybe try swap out the MOSFETs or something, because I think, yeah, I actually have all the MOSFETs for like a reference RX 480 VRM, which I'm not sure if that'll work out. Well, no, I could swap out some of the I could swap out all the high sides, because if I remember, yeah, the low sides are decent. Let's just take the damn thing apart. Where's a screwdriver? Let's take a look at the disaster that is the VRM on this thing. It's really not that great, but it's not terrible, because I think, because looking at the numbers I have in the calculator, yeah, the main problem is just the high side MOSFET on this thing is slow. And then the low sides are 3.2 milliohm RDS on, so that's not the best. It's also not the worst. Like, if you wanted something that's really, like, if you look at like the Vapor X 7970 6 gig, that actually has two 68, is it 6725s or 6894s? I'm not sure, but like two international rectifier direct FETs. Oh, and this is a 3 heat pipe heatsink for a 7970, so that's great. That's what you want to see on a card that can easily, well, it's not a complete disaster, but yeah, that's not going to do well. Probably still better than a blower. Anyway, so there's the front of the card. And yeah, so the thing is, we have two low side MOSFETs in each phase, and then we have one, high side. And the thing about the high side MOSFET is it's kind of slow, so it's relatively low RDS on, but it's just pretty damn slow. So if we replaced it with something, I don't know. I think well, let's see. Yeah, if I replaced it with something faster, I could knock off it should knock off around like 3 watts VRM heat dissipation from the high side of the VRM. The low side is, they're 3.2 milliohms, so individually each MOSFET isn't that great, but since they're in parallel per phase, you end up with like 1.6 milliohms RDS on the low side. So not exactly like what I would consider a complete fire hazard, but it's not anything great. Like, it's not good. It's really not what I would consider good. So yeah, depending on, like, basically my plans for this card is, I got it really cheap. So my plans are basically to mess around with like swapping out the MOSFETs and seeing if I can't get the VRM to be better. So yeah, basically this is a victim card. Also, that thermal paste is weird. Like, look at that stuff. It's gold or bronze-ish. I don't know. But yeah, not the usual suspect of like dark gray crusty goo. This stuff seems to at least stay wet. I'm not sure if that's because it's like coming out of it's not really a solution, but like yeah, well, it's like, who cares? I'm gonna eventually replace that anyway, but still, so I picked this up because it's a red PCB, and I just thought a red PCB 7970 would be cool to have. There, that's my justification for it. I was hoping the VRM would be like halfway decent, but it's not even halfway decent. It's probably the worst possible configuration of this VRM that well, actually, out of the variations of this VRM that I've seen, this is by far the worst. So, yeah. Well, should be by far the worst. I guess I can test that as well, because I do have a bunch of cards now that I can mess around with. So, yeah. Hopefully the core is good on it, but I mostly have it as a novelty thing. There's a bunch of these on eBay that are, like, dead. Which, I'm not sure if that's because the PCB is failing, or if that's because the core is just doing the... Just, has the FCBGA failed, which wouldn't be that rare for a 7970 after this much time. Like, these cards are old. Anyway, I hope it's also a pre-boost card, because what I think, like... I think the boost cards, like all of the cards that came out after AMD introduced boost, they seem to clock worse on average than the early 7970s. So hopefully this is a pretty early one. Can't really tell, but we'll see. So that's another card I picked up recently. And then we have this here. So yeah, this is a HIS. So HIS. That's literally the company name. In my opinion, that's a pretty stupid name, but there. So this is a HIS iTurbo HD 7950. I think it's pretty obvious. Well, okay, it might not be obvious, but this I picked up because of the heatsink. This is the... Like, this heatsink got some really... Like, this is a blower heatsink, and we all know I think blowers suck. But this blower right here actually got a bunch of pretty good reviews. So I want to test it out for myself to see... You know, is it actually good or not? I guess is the option. Like, those are the only two options. Is it good or not? So interesting things to observe is that we do have this massive gap and, you know, between the blower and the PCB. So, like, the actual fan and the PCB. So I assume what's going on with that. And also the fan is, like, pretty damn large by blower standards. They have it offset and everything. So like this negates most of the arguments for like why you should get a blower heatsink, because it's like it's not two slots, right? Like you can't run it in four. Like you can't do. It doesn't help you in a multi GPU setup basically at all. So yeah, it's three slots. It's taller than a stock card, right? The heat pipes, and this overhang right here. But still, I want to see how good it is. Because at the very least, and it also doesn't really exhaust that much, like it doesn't force all of the air out the back, because that's not an airtight seal right there. So if there's a problem getting the air out through the rear bracket, it's just going to spray out the sides sort of in this area. And also we have a great big cut right there. Now, admittedly, airflow in this area of GPUs just isn't really a thing, because there's a motherboard down here, which just acts as a great big airflow restrictor. Which is one of the, like, that's actually one of the big downsides with open air coolers, which have fins like this way, is that what you end up with is there's a dead zone right here, where like half the heat, like this lower half of the heatsink is significantly reduced in effectiveness. And on some cards, what I've seen is actually you get a really interesting effect where the lower half of that heatsink, like the air right here by the motherboard, is like several, like say 10, 20 degrees higher temperature than what the card is intaking on the top side. Which the interesting thing about that is if you actually put a fan to blow just air all over the front of the card on a triple fan, I don't have a good example card sitting around me right now, but you get the idea. Basically, with a lot of those cards, what you end up with is just like you can massively drop the temperature on those cards by just dealing with the sort of hotspot that you get down here. But this won't do that because it's a blower, right? Like, I mean, it won't pull it in. So yeah, they do have the gap right there. So I assume that's mostly just done so that the blower can pull in air from both sides instead of just one side. Not sure how effective that is. I don't really know that much about fan design. Also, they have blue thermal pads on this. Like bright blue thermal pads. Like they've really gone with the blue. Blue PCB, bright blue thermal pads. Well, the shroud's black, but I actually, like, normally there'd be a sticker on this, and I've decided I don't like the shroud being just plain black, so I'll probably do something horrible to it eventually. and everybody will cringe at Buildzoid's infantile tastes, but whatever. Anyway, let's pull this thing apart. Wrong screwdriver. Let's grab this. But yeah, I'm really interested to test the heatsink, and the other thing that I'm interested to test with this card is the actual memory. Because I have another 7950, which, you know, I've already mentioned when talking about that 7970. And the 7950 I already have, that's like an MSI Power Edition, and that has SK Hynix GDDR5. This has Elpida. And the thing is, 7950s actually have the most imbalanced memory control, like memory bus width relative to stream processor count out of all of the sort of, out of all of the GDDR5 GPUs AMD has made, these are the most imbalanced in terms of how wide the memory controller is relative to how many stream processors you have on the core. Because this has a 384-bit memory bus for a 1792 stream processors. There. That's what I wanted to say. I knew the number, I just didn't know what to like how to put it into words. So, and the end result of that is that the ratio between stream processors per bit of memory controller, like it's not that important, but it's just kind of interesting to think about, is it's set, wait, is it really? Oh, I screwed up the calculation. 384. There, it's 4.6 stream processors per bit of memory controller on one of these. If you compare that to something like, say, a 290, which is 256 stream processors to a 512-bit memory bus, that actually works out to only 5 stream processors. So this thing is more memory like bandwidth relative to stream processors than like a 290X or a 290 or really any other AMD GPU in that era, which is kind of interesting because it basically means these 7950s should really not care about maximum memory frequency. And somebody pointed out to me that apparently Elpida GDDR5 at the time that these were being made might do better memory timings than SK Hynix. So this is an awesome opportunity, in my opinion, to test that, where it's like, okay, I can test this card with just the lowest possible memory timings I can get it to run at the highest possible memory frequencies with those timings, right? We can potentially, like, I think I can probably go as low as like 1125 timings. And I'm not talking like if I just use the straps. I could also go full custom timings, but I've not really messed with that on GPUs yet. Just because I've not really needed to. It's just like you throw a strap on it and already you're doing... Because the thing is, all of the old... like, it's funny how the fact that you can really easily modify the memory timings on AMD GPUs was only discovered relatively recently. So if you're benching all of the old 7950s, like 7000 series cards, which in my opinion, for overclocking, these are the most fun to mess with, the old 7000 series cards. Also the 200 series, like everything before Fiji, basically. And Polaris is also pretty decent, but it's not worth as many points and far more expensive. But Polaris is when the memory timing thing really became a thing. And so now you can go back to like 7950s and just change the strap and you're already doing way more than anybody else at the time. So yeah, I want to mess around with comparing the efficiency of the Elpida memory with, you know, customized timings, however much I am bothered with, to the Hynix card, with also custom timings. Plus, this thing uses the exact same PCB as my like actual PCB layout. Like it's not the same PCB. It's blue. It's different components, different MOSFETs on this thing, and it's also less efficient than the MSI card. But yeah, so MSI's Power Edition has the best VRM out of all of the like this style PCB cards that I've shown so far. But still. This one's not that bad. At 260 amps output, 1.45 volts, this produces about 50.5 watts of heat on the VRM, so it's going to need a lot of airflow. But I've already dealt with that on the 7.9, like the MSI card, but the MSI card only put out about 44 watts of heat. But still, this will be fun to mess with, in my opinion. And yeah, I have like a lot of interesting testing to do with it. So like mess around with the heatsink, see how good that is. But more importantly, Elpida memory, do a comparison to the SK Hynix memory, and who knows, maybe it'll end up causing people to, like when people are binning 7970s and 7950s for benchmarking them, now everybody will be looking for Elpida cards instead of SK Hynix cards, because, that's exactly what we need. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to test. And, and the VRM on this is actually, it's different MOSFET. So it's like alpha and omega semiconductor. The MSI card was, what was it? The MSI card was Magna semiconductor, and the power color red PCB 7970, that's on semiconductor MOSFETs. Not that semiconductor makes bad MOSFETs, it's just that when, they make some really high-end MOSFETs, they also make high-end MOSFETs, but it's just that most GPU manufacturers and board vendors, if they're going to choose a crappy MOSFET, it's going to be made by semiconductor for some reason. I don't know. I guess they must be the most, I guess they're probably the most available or something. They're just really easy to get, so they're even cheaper than the other options out there, but yeah. And this has the thermal dissipation upgrades for the PCB. And it actually comes with a VRM heatsink of its own in the base plate. Though, unfortunately, I don't think will it clear? It might clear an LN2 pot, the base plate on this, but not 100% certain on that. Still, this should be an interesting card to mess with. Not sure when I'll actually get around to that. And, of course, I can also bench 7950 Crossfire, which is going to be, fun as well. More fun than benching GTX 480 Crossfire, SLI, because I don't really do NVIDIA cards, so every time I'm dealing with benching NVIDIA, it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Anyway, the last card I picked up, for now, because I unfortunately bought even more shit, but anyway, this right here, this is probably the least unique of the cards here, but the reason why I'm really happy that I picked one of these up is because of the condition it's in. It's really clean, and it's not one of the ones with the god-awful heatsink stickers. There's some really ugly HD 4870 X2s out there. So yeah, I have a nice clean Hiss one right here. And I actually have, and thanks to a fan of the channel, I have another 4870X2, that's the 3-fan Asus model, where that actually uses the reference PCB, they just replaced the cooling system on it. So, yeah, I can run 4-way Crossfire with these now, which will be interesting to mess with. And also, I do intend to mod one of these cards, but I think I'll probably keep this one relatively stock, because this one is just so damn clean. Though, who knows? I also thought to myself, I'm never going to mod my Pro Duo, the Polaris Pro Duo. That didn't stop me. Eventually, it ended up modded as well. But, yeah. So, this will be, something to look forward to as well, I guess. And hopefully, I'll actually bench this on a live stream and not just, on my own time. I don't know. The thing is, setting up the live streams is a pain. I guess if I just didn't care so much about making I don't know, if I had lower standards for the streams, then I guess we'd get more streams, but they'd probably be worse. Anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to go through the haul of recent GPUs I recently picked up. I have a whole bunch of other stuff coming as well. I'm awful. I've benched the 780 Ti's, so I've eliminated that. I've started working on the GTX 480s, so good job me. But in the meantime, I've picked up another 4870 X2. Well, actually, the GTX 480s doesn't count because I'm done with that card. That thing's going into long-term storage. I've not yet set up proper long-term storage for GPUs, but I need to do that. Anyway, so yeah, there's this. Which the thing about these actually 4870 X2s and other old dual-core GPUs like this is these don't work on X299. And they don't even reliably work on Z390, which is really annoying. If you actually saw the stuff I did with I did some GTX 590, what was it? Was it even a live stream? Well, it didn't get archived, so whatever. But I did I definitely benched a GTX 590 that's pretty heavily modified. But that GTX 590, when I was benching it, I was actually benching it off of the PCH, off of the chipset PCIe lanes, because on Z390, the CPU PCIe lines, you plug in one of these old cards with like, I think it might just be like anything that doesn't have a PEX 8747, which again, like that's because they're old. If the card doesn't have a PLX 8747, basically the CPU doesn't know what to do with the card and it doesn't detect it. So you can't actually, like, if I wanted to run this on X299, I have to run it off of the PCIe lanes coming from the chipset, which you can't do you can't run Crossfire then because there's not two PCIe slots coming off of the chipset, even on X299. So that really, well, it doesn't really suck because I still have my 6950X. I still have X99. Like, I have a bunch of X99. Do I have a bunch or just two? I think I have two X99 boards. So yeah, I can just like pull up the X99 stuff and we can bench these. Also the GTX 590s. But right now I want to bench a whole bunch of stuff on X299. So that's probably going to be the HD 7950s, the 7970. I can do 4-way 7970s now. Actually, I've been able to do that for a while. I've just not done it for some reason. So yeah, lots of horrible multi-GPU monstrosities that I can build. And I have a problem. I really need to stop picking up GPUs, but yeah, the thing is just if you want to get in, like, the thing that I love about extreme overclocking, or well, not really extreme overclocking, just competitive overclocking, is that it gives you an excuse to pick up a bunch of really old GPUs because they're interesting and you're gonna bench them and not just put them in a box after you've cleaned them up, which is normally which happens to a lot of the cards. But recently I've been making some progress with actually getting through the backlog. Unfortunately, that's been putting, you know, things like the Z390 Phantom Gaming ITX stuff on delay, and other content on delay as well. But yeah, I mean, I got through all of this eventually. So, and anyway, so yeah, that's all the cards you have to look forward to. Because yeah. Fun fact, this actually has a 3-phase, like the VCore VRM on these is 3-phase. So I really want to mess with cap modding these because 3-phase just sounds like, well, let's put it this way. I have a 3-phase ITX Z270 motherboard. Adding a bunch of capacitors to that thing made it go from needing like 1.3 volts for 5 gigahertz to 1.25 volts for 5 gigahertz on a 7700K. This is 3 phases. I have high hopes. I might also be really disappointed. But anyway, yeah, so 4870X2, 7950, his card, benched some GTX 480 stuff, making progress on the endless backlog. Well, actually, no, I'm not making progress. I'm making it worse. But there, hopefully, I don't know, maybe I'll inspire people to also get GPU hoarding issues. Really not a good pastime, but hey, as long as you're buying stuff made before like 2013, it's a cheap problem to have. It's actually cheaper than AAA games these days, if I think about it. Yeah, like literally, these are cheaper than AAA games. Anyway, so yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. I mean, if this was awful, tell me so that I never do something like this again, because the last thing I want to do is waste your time. Though I think this whole video was probably a big waste of time. I mean, it's just generic rambling about, look at my new cool toys. I'm not even telling you how to do anything cool with the toys, so... Anyway, but yeah, I'd love to hear any thoughts you have. So there's the comments section. You can leave your thoughts there and suggestions and feedback and all of that. If you'd like to support my my GPU addiction, I have a Patreon. I have a Teespring. There's merch on Teespring, and you can also, if you don't like buying stuff, there's the Patreon. There you don't have to buy stuff. You just get a bunch of sign up to it, I guess. Is that what you would call it? Subscribe? I guess it's technically a subscription because it's like a monthly thing that you pay for. And there are Patreon benefits. You get early access to some videos. You get bonus videos, which are basically videos so bad that Buildzoid doesn't want to put them on the actual main channel. So, like, if you pay for it, you can get even worse AHOC content if you pay for it. Anyway, yeah, there's early access. Oh, and there's also an AHOC, like, there's a support, like, patrons get access to the, like, supporters Discord. Everybody who also sends in, like, random hardware for me to hoard also gets access to the supporters Discord. And I think Twitch subscribers do as well. So, Yeah, Twitch subscribers also do. So yeah, that's it for the video. I really 40 minutes. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'll get back to like more interesting content eventually. I just like this is the part of overclocking that, you know, like this is my favorite part of overclocking is just messing with a whole bunch of random hardware. So here's my next batch of toys to mess with. You'll be seeing them eventually. Not anytime. I don't know when. So eventually. Goodbye.